Catholic council inspector is recovering after cheating death at the hands of what's believed to have been a loyalist gunman on the Shankill. The intended victim tackled the man after a gun aimed at his head jammed several times. The would-be killer hit out with his pistol and fired one shot before fleeing. A woman injured after opening a parcel bomb addressed to her husband, a former UDR soldier, may lose the tips of her fingers. The explosion damaged furniture and shattered windows at the couple's home in Arctic.
There has been a war going on in Northern Ireland for as long as anyone can remember. Newspapers report killings, assassinations, and bomb attacks, as if the situation was simply another irrelevant backwater, a trouble spot for fanatics. But hundreds have died in the British province in the last 10 years alone. For those on the loyalist side who descend from early British settlers and comprise 2/3 of the population of the North, the fight is to maintain Protestant culture and control by keeping Ulster British. For nationalists, the struggle is to free the North and reunite Ireland as an independent state. Paramilitary groups on both sides have traditionally been male-dominated organizations. But women have always been there, agitators behind the scenes, as well as in the front lines. With women joining the ranks in increasing numbers in the 1970s, the IRA, or Irish Republican Army, has been particularly affected by female participation. Today, the nationalist movement is formally committed to women's rights and believes that liberation for the country must bring freedom for women too. With British troops on the streets and neighborhoods divided by concrete walls, everyday life becomes political. And women in Northern Ireland are the first to demand that their struggle be seen as far more than a quarrel between men over territory.
The women became closer, much, much closer than they had been. The women became like a moving force, a spontaneous moving force. There was no way that the struggle could have gone on without the help and the commitment of the women. Well, the women would get together and they would have like whistles, and we would be out on the streets from 11 o'clock at night until it got light again in the morning. And we would warn each other off by either sounding the whistles or banging bin lids to tell each other just what street in the area that the Brits were in. And then the women would converge from all parts of the district to that particular area and just get stuck into the British Army. Women were particularly vicious because we did have access to ground. Our husbands were incarcerated in prison for no reason at all. We had no money to feed our children, so the women got together and we had a communal cooking. Then as food was being hijacked and brought into the area, the women organised that and looked after the elderly and the children, and then whatever food was left over was distributed amongst more able-bodied members of the community. So the women were very deeply involved in that sort of a struggle. They were involved to the degree where they had to look after their children and the elderly and the community at large, and a lot of them were committed to the nationalist struggle in Northern Ireland and get the Brit presence out. It's as simple as that.
Josephine lives in Ardoyne, a nationalist area of North Belfast, where in 1972 and 74, the British Army allowed loyalist extremists to come in and attack local people. Families were burnt out of their homes and pogroms were carried out on the neighborhood. Events like these drove some women to join the Irish Republican Army. Northern Ireland has long been the poor relation in Britain's welfare state. The region has the lowest wages and the highest cost of living of anywhere in the United Kingdom. In many areas, unemployment is well over 70%, and housing conditions are some of the worst in Western Europe. The civil rights movement of the late 1960s organized to address some of these issues. It was met by violent opposition from anti-nationalist conservatives. Almost immediately, the situation broke down into sectarian fighting, and British troops were added to the chaos on the streets. Coinciding with the women's movement, the so-called Troubles of the 1970s inspired some women to take up the issues of abortion, reproductive rights, childcare, and health, and incorporate them into an agenda for social as well as political change. Now, Josephine is just one of many women struggling to balance her own needs with those of her community.
My husband was arrested and interned and back out again, during which time I got pregnant with my third child. And then he was rearrested and sentenced to 15 years imprisonment. In many ways, for me, it was a welcome relief. Like other women in the area, my husband beat me and knocked me about, and I was actually glad of the respite of him being in prison. It didn't prevent me from supporting the nationalist struggle. The fact that being a member of the Provisional IRA, he chose to beat me. But I began to see through a lot of the interest politics that were emerging. We had to bury the dead. We wept at the gravesides. We struggled. The men made political statements. The men could do open university courses in prison. Many of us couldn't count. But we knew how to juggle the accounts and budget the money and pay the bills and tide things over and keep things going. It took its toll on a lot of women. I think I started to ask myself why things like this were happening and why I was so deeply involved and what was I getting out of it.
Speech, Ian Paisley attacked the RUC and the government in the south, and he again called on the men and women of Ulster to mobilise. Afterwards, he said he'd be prepared to take up arms if he felt he really had to.
If the time comes, and they're going to push us into a united Ireland, then law or no law, we will arm ourselves and fight to the death, as our forefathers did. Carson was illegal, the UVF was illegal, their arms were illegal, their mobilisation was illegal in those circumstances, and they made Ulster. And I want to tell you, we are determined to die for Ulster if needs be. But we're not going to die, we're going to live.
And you would take up arms?
I would be prepared to take up arms to fight against the takeover by the Republic.
When Irish nationalists oppose the repression of the British state with force, their resistance is condemned as terrorism. Meanwhile, loyalist conservatives mobilise for war to protect the status quo, and British soldiers patrol the streets as peacekeepers, in armour-plated Land Rovers with loaded rifles. Clearly, violence is a political issue in Ireland. Yet behind the gunfire and the politicians' words, domestic abuse against women goes on here as everywhere, in every community, disregarded and dismissed as unimportant.
I think police have the attitude they're having a family squabble, it'll blow over in the morning, or maybe she done something that she's only had her slap, you know. Because at one time, my husband, he just took my house apart and he gave me an awful beating, and I phoned for the police, and this was before I'd even heard of women's aid, you know. And they come into the house and asked me had I got an exclusion order, and at that time I hadn't a clue what that was. And I said no. And they said then there was absolutely nothing they could do. And they walked out and left him there, you know. And then I got another hiding because I'd brought the police to the house. But one of the policemen told me then what an exclusion order was, and that if I got one, they could arrest him and keep him in a cell overnight if he done it again. So I done that. I got an exclusion order. But it happened again. He put me down the stairs. I mean, my face was unrecognisable by the time he'd finished. And he'd smashed up furniture and smashed windows. And I called the police again and I showed them the exclusion order. And what he said then was that I'd have to prove that my husband had actually hit me. That for all he knew, I might have fell down the stairs and banged my head.
That hadn't done it. I stayed in Mommy's over the weekend. I went in to see the social worker on Monday. I left on my own, but I explained to the children why I was leaving. And I went into the social worker and I said, look, I have to get somewhere to go. I've been to the police, and they sort of say, I asked them, had they a number of the battered wives in Belfast for where I live. It's a country area, they have nothing like that. So they sort of stood and said, you know, I deserved. They couldn't do anything for me. I mean, I went in with a close tore on my back and my leg and cut off me, would kick me and batter me into the ditch, and they said that there's nothing we can do about it. It's a family affair.
This means to say he's free, like to kick me in the main road and there's nothing you can do. And I said no. So I turned and walked out.
I think before you actually come in, you think you're the only woman that is actually going through what you've been through. When you go in there, you feel there's a lot more outside going through it, and you know then you're okay. To the extent that I think you're afraid of the talk too that goes with it when you leave your home. Through the family, and the family don't see it in that light because they haven't been seeing what's going on within the house. And when you go there, then you realise there's a lot more people with the same problems or worse problems, and you feel a lot better knowing there's more people going through it. That sounds terrible, but you're not on your own no more.
Hoarfrost covers the ground as the brim of morning etches itself on the hillside. It disappears as moist November heat casts a dubious eye on the hollow of a predator's cave. Time itself smells the thinning leaves of decomposition, the discarded annals of life. Perhaps yours or mine is at risk as we ignore the color of light. Truth is in the geography of metaphor, contradiction in the artifice of speechmakers' words. As the season sets in further, will the silent torment of nature's foretelling untwine the distance we create?
I also began to take stock of what was happening in the area at large, in particular the women who had struggled so hard and gone back and forward to Long Kesh and were true to the men and true to the cause, were not treated any different when their husbands got out of prison. They were treated really badly. They were battered wives. The situation for them did not change, even though they had spent years of their lives supporting the ideals of the nationalist cause that their husbands were struggling for. And at this point I decided that I didn't want that for me. I didn't want this man coming out of prison and beating me about again the way he had done. And I decided that the best thing to do was to get out of the marriage, to divorce him and to take something for me. Unfortunately, you don't divorce a national hero or a local hero in the middle of a national struggle. Or you don't stay around to be the example to other women if you do. So I came in for a lot of hassle from the powers to be in the area. And I just decided somewhere along the line that I'd make a stand for me. And so I went ahead with the divorce and was ostracised by my own community for a long time. And my children were in all sorts of hassle, blamed for all sorts of things that went on in the area. This happens to single parents when a woman's on her own in an area like this. Her children are very often blamed for things that they don't do. And this forces you into all sorts of defense situations. What it forced me into was another marriage, just to have somebody there to protect me. I was still very much tied up in this idea of needing someone's approval and permission to be who I was. And I walked into another marriage. And that's when the fun began. Because when I tried at long last to go back to school to study, then I come up against it with my second husband and my children at this point. Decided that they didn't want me away from the kitchen sink and the bosom of the family and opening a book and actually interesting myself in something outside.
Since going into the refuge, I think I've changed completely. I've changed my attitudes. I mean, I was brought up to believe that a woman's the weaker sex. She must get the man's socks washed and make the dinner, and when the man comes into the house, you get up and then and sit down near the fire because he's the man, and he gets the extra potato on the plate because he's the man. And I just don't think that counts anymore.
Northern Irish women are finding their own ways to bring about change. Some have found personal solutions. Others have joined with organisations like the Belfast Women's Aid to set up safe homes for women and families from all sides of the political divide. For years, such work has been dismissed as unpolitical, but today women's rights are surfacing as one of the most political issues of all. The willingness of the nationalist movement to face women's questions honestly will prove its commitment to real change, not just for soldiers, but for civilians too.
During the Troubles, it was all right for women like me to go out and find safe houses for men who were on the run, or to bandage up the wounded, or to cook communally during the time of the strike, or whatever. It was okay to step outside the traditional role of wife and mother to do those things, but don't actually step out of your role and take anything for yourself. That was a non-starter. I mean, my husband felt threatened by me wanting to do O-levels or A-levels or anything for myself. And I know that this is what prevented other women in the area from doing, or from taking something for themselves as well.
It took me 13 years to make this decision. I mean, stuck it for the kids' sake. But I felt as though I was at 4 roads and I didn't know which way to go. So, I mean, I did get my children. I've 6 now, and the eldest one's 14, the youngest one's 2, and I explained to them that they couldn't come with me, but I would. I mean, I was honest with my children. They explained me and their daddy were not getting on. They've lived with nothing but growing up and listening to us arguing, me getting knocked about. From I come here, I feel free. I mean, I do have a mind of my own, and now I'm using it. To me, I feel as if I've been serving 13 years in prison, and now I feel free.
It's being strong enough to be able to answer, now a simple wee thing like answering a phone and giving out a wee bit of advice. You know, things that you felt before were so stupid, you know, because I really felt like I was an nothing before I went in. I was a nobody, and I was thick. Well, that's the way I was made to believe I was anyway. But there you found that you learned what you had and what you were capable of, and that you were a person. I really felt like a real person while I was there. And it was nice to know that somebody would come to you and ask for your advice, you know, instead of you running to everybody else. But it was great, and you met so many friends that you have the rest of your life, you know. Like probably people you would never have met before. But because of the Troubles here, the likes of me and Valerie would never have met, because we're from 2 different sides and we don't go on each other's road. But we're the best friends, you know. I think that's a good thing too, the people mix, and there's no politics brought into it. And in fact, we have good crack sometimes for being different, you know. Religions, we have good out laugh about that, don't we? You know. But I think that's great, you know, because to me, I would never have met one of her sort before, you know. I was brought up in my own part of the area, and I thought that I would never have to meet people like that, and I think it's great that I've been able, you know, most of my friends are the other side, you know, it's great.
More than the other side.
More friends on the other side, not my own, you know. And it's great, even that side. I think if everybody got together like that, there wouldn't be a war on here, you know.
I only see violence on the TV. they don't see the ordinary. I mean,
Everyday
they're living in
living.
Belfast now, and I haven't seen a thing. I dread it coming up here for that reason. You see the news every night. When I've come up here, I haven't watched news. I haven't read a paper because it's all violence, and it's not violent here.
Politicians are really interested in the political state of the country, and I mean, we're not.
I mean, if
we're
they
not
took away
interested in bread and
a
butter.
wee juke round them, I mean, people will ask me, who do you support? I support 3 kids, and that's it, I just don't, politics doesn't interest me at all. In fact, right now my politics is women itself.
I would like the politician to come in and live my life for one week and see how he feels then.
Give Maggie
Completely
Thatcher my £55 a week and 3 kids and see how she does it, I don't think they've an interest. I think maybe they should have an interest. Come out and see what the ordinary people are doing.
When I got to college to do the A-levels, even though it was a powerful struggle trying to do that and to see the family and all, I also felt that that there was a light at the end of the tunnel. When I started going to college, I met women from both sides of the divide who were trying to do something for themselves. And yes, there were groups of working class women, both Catholic and Protestant, who were getting together basically on bread and butter issues, but on other things as well. Working class women should get together. I feel that we need a voice, and we will get that voice through education and through educating each other.
The women's movement in Northern Ireland has managed to organise across sectarian lines on many issues of common concern. But to do this, they have often had to shy away from national political questions, in the same way that the nationalist party Sinn Féin has in the past focused on the liberation struggle at the expense of women's needs. Today, these two strands of the progressive movement are coming together, and International Women's Day is one occasion when their issues meet. Women in Northern Ireland, both in and outside of the nationalist movement, celebrate March 8th every year with concerts, dances, and a march against violence against women. The day is also marked by a picket outside the province's women's jail, until 1986 located in the town of Armagh. More than 30 nationalist women prisoners are held in deplorable conditions in Northern Ireland under the notorious Prevention of Terrorism Act. Most are between 18 and 28 years old, and some are sentenced to 40 years. Many are simply awaiting trial. The rally outside their jail every year is a testament to the will of the nationalist movement to recognize women's participation in their fight. It is also evidence of women's determination to work for a real program for social change, one that is rooted in their experience and one that listens to their demands.
Progress here in Ireland may to many seem slow, and the gains made by women in this country may be termed as small. But to Irish women, every step towards a better society is a major step, and every reform is another achievement. Attitudes here are changing, but we are still faced with major obstacles and archaic ideas. The very fact that there is more open discussion on such issues as equality, rape, illegitimacy, and contraception, and that people are more aware of the situation facing women is a gain in itself. Changes have been made. We have had reforms in such areas as equal pay, maternity leave, social welfare, and in other smaller areas, but we are still faced with a long, hard struggle. Women's movement should remember that women in Ireland are faced with exceptional barriers. Barriers which many of you, we hope, will never have to face. We have the added hardships of an artificially divided country. On one hand, a free state, still very much dominated by a conservative Catholic Church. On the other, the British occupied 6 counties and all that implies, and overall, a long war for national liberation.
I think that men have been beating their wives all over the world for years upon years, troubles or no troubles, and it won't stop until women decide that they want an end to it and stand up for themselves. Because things are changing, but they won't change unless you want it to. And you've got to stand up and want that change in yourself, because the world's not going to change around you while you're sitting on your bum. If you want to change, you've got to get up and want that for yourself and do it. don't think the Troubles have anything to do with that at all.
Well, I did divorce my husband while he was in prison serving a 15-year sentence. I did get into a lot of trouble for it. I was ostracised in my own area. I've done it. I've gone back to school. I've hung in there. I feel other women can do the same thing. I feel that working class Protestant women and Catholic women need to get together and say, right, you don't use us anymore for your own purposes. Now we're doing it for ourselves. But that won't make the political question go away. We need the Brits off the streets of Belfast, and we need to get back into some sort of normality. But in the meantime, the women can bring it together and hold it. That's one of the lights out of all of the mayhem in the past 17 years, is that the women have been able to hold together through whatever.